So on this channel, I've talked about many albums that have flopped, and this is one where I didn't really expect it to disappoint so much commercially based on all the hype that it had. After the commercial disaster of her 2012 album Lotus and 6 years of not doing much, Christina Aguilera was ready to reclaim her spot as one of the best pop acts of the century. But when her highly anticipated album Liberation dropped, it flopped, leaving fans and critics kind of stunned. The album debuted at number 6 on the Billboard 200 with 68,000 album equivalent units in its first week, which is decent, but nowhere near like her commercial peak or even a little after her commercial peak. The lead single, Accelerate, barely made a dent, failing to chart on the Billboard Hot 100, and also fans weren't really a big fan of the experimental sound. The follow-up, Fall in Line, featuring Demi Lovato, had some promise, peaking at number 39, but disappeared from the charts after just 2 weeks. And then there was a third single, Like I Do, which was much better than the other two, but that one didn't even gain any attention at all, despite it gaining the Grammy nomination for the best rap/sung performance. And therefore, by the end of the album cycle, Liberation had only sold around 200,000 copies worldwide, a disappointing figure for an artist like Christina. But even back then, a lot of people were not really surprised that this album failed. So what happened? What went wrong with Liberation? Here's a list of a bunch of things that went wrong and some fan theories about why the album flopped. The first one is lack of mainstream appeal. Fans speculated that Christina intentionally distanced herself from mainstream pop trends and took Liberation into a more experimental sound, blending soul, R&B, and hip-hop influences, because she knew that she wouldn't be as successful. And although she had like a powerhouse voice or whatever, a lot of her core fans were not used to like the R&B and soul sound. Yeah, she kind of has the voice for that, but a lot of her core fans are mostly into pop acts who like big pop songs and EDM songs, you know, things that, let's be honest, the gays would like. So a lot of fans weren't really into this, and I kind of understand. And of course, the mainstream media was not really checking for Liberation, was not really checking for Christina, because she's kind of old news. Like, unless you're a core fan, unless you're a super fan of Christina Aguilera, there's nothing that she's gonna release right now or back in 2018 that would like massively capture your attention, unless you were a massive fan or unless the song was a massive hit. Second is that the industry was leaning more towards like minimalist trap-infused pop songs rather than the traditional vocal heavy approach that Christina Aguilera is mostly known for. And around that time, artists like Ariana Grande, Dua Lipa were on top. Of course, there were others, but those were the ones who were really making noise. Next is weak promotion strategy. Now, many fans blame the album's underperformance mostly on the poor promotion. The lead single, Accelerate, had a polarizing reception and was not really a strong radio single. And that makes sense. If you want a hit, and especially when you've been not making music for like 6 years, if you want a hit album right off the gate, you need to come out with a massive radio single. It doesn't really have to be pop, it just has to be massive on the radio. And yeah, Accelerate, the lead single, was not that. It was really experimental. And on another note, a lot of fans felt like the album's rollout was rushed and it lacked a cohesive strategy, which I can also see. This album, if I remember correctly, was pushed back a few times before it was finally released. Unfortunately, to a lot of fans, it wasn't really worth the wait, and obviously the general public was not a huge fan. The next theory was streaming era challenges. I see where they're coming from. Christina's fan base primarily consists of millennials who have grown up usually buying physical albums and downloaded music rather than Gen Z listeners who dominated the streaming platforms. So yes, of course, her millennial fans bought the CDs, but around 2018, this was when streaming really took over and would count for the bulk of your album sales. And unfortunately, Liberation did not do really well on streaming services, mostly because her core audience hadn't fully transitioned to streaming services. I feel like if Liberation had been released right now with the same kind of hype that it had back in 2018 among those in the know, those who were already interested in a new Christina Aguilera album, it would do much better in terms of streaming than what it did back in 2018. A few fans said that this album had a little bit too much competition because around the same time that this album was released, in June of 2018, Kanye's Ye album was released, Beyonce and Jay-Z's surprise album Everything Is Love was released, and other major releases were dominating the cultural conversation, so it was hard for Christina to stand out. I don't know about that one. Yes, maybe in the first week it wouldn't have done huge numbers, but if the interest was genuinely there, it should have lasted much longer on the charts than it originally did. It should have sold more than 200,000 copies. So I don't really think it was a competition from these albums that contributed to the album flopping. I just think that her fans and the general public were not interested in this album enough. The next theory is poor single choices, and I fully agree with this. I said before, Accelerate was not the best option for a lead single meant for the radio. Yeah, it could have been a lead single, but it shouldn't have been the one that was pushed on the radio. It should not have been the one that was meant to introduce the audience to a new Christina Aguilera album. I mean, it was way too experimental, and they tried to correct that with Fall in Line featuring Demi Lovato as a second single, which was another disaster. I mean, when that single came out and it was performed on the Billboard Music Awards, it was a mess. It was like they were fighting with each other's voices. It was like they were competing with each other. If you've seen the videos, if you've seen the clips, go and watch it. It's the funniest thing you'll ever see from the 2018 Billboard Music Awards. Like, what was going on? Like, they weren't on key, and you could tell that they were struggling. Their voices were barely in sync. They weren't on key. They were just shouting. It was embarrassing, honestly. A few people said that it was because of the long hiatus between Lotus released in 2012 and Liberation released in 2018. That's kind of what did it in. That's why the album flopped, which I disagree. Like, if anything, the longer the wait, the more anticipation your fans should have for your next music. If the music does not live up to what your fans want and what the general public want, that's when it'll flop. This next theory, I sort of kind of believe, and it's that a lot of fans think it wasn't really meant to be a hit album. Liberation wasn't designed to be a commercial powerhouse. And they say this based on the fact that Christina described this as a deeply personal project, a form of artistic freedom after years of feeling constrained by the industry, and fans believe that she sacrificed chart performance to prioritize authenticity, and that the album's underperformance, it wasn't really a failure, but rather a conscious choice. I sort of kind of believe that this album wasn't really meant to be a commercial success, but I also don't think it was meant to flop this hard, selling just around 200,000 copies worldwide as of 2025, because there are plenty of artists who have come out with deeply personal albums, and those albums have been massive commercial successes. So even though I sort of kind of believe this, I also feel like this is just a cope for fans to like not feel too disappointed that their faves album did not smash the charts as they had hoped it would. This next theory is that it lacked consistent promotion even after the album came out. She did not fully leverage digital marketing and social media trends. That is true. And of course, there was no significant radio push or a coordinated campaign to keep the album visible in the weeks after its release. Now, a lot of this is true. The promotion was sporadic and not much effort was made after the album was released. The general public, after Accelerate was released, was not even going to be a target for their promotional effort because they were not interested in Accelerate. Nothing that Christina was putting out interested the general public. So it kind of makes sense why the promotion seemed inconsistent, because it really only looked like they were promoting to the fans, and even with that, fans really weren't connecting the way Christina possibly wanted them to. And of course, if there's not a significant radio push for a mainstream pop album, it probably won't do mainstream pop album numbers. Next theory is that it had weak music videos. I disagree with this. I think music videos, even back in 2018, did not have that kind of power to determine whether or not an album became successful. And also, the music videos were totally fine. Accelerate was kind of a weird choice. That whole music video was just weird and creepy. It really reminded me of like the promo for Miley Cyrus's album Dead Pets. The whole visual of Accelerate was just weird. But I don't think that was enough to determine whether this album would fail. And also, Fall in Line had a great music video. That music video looked like it had budget, but it also kind of looked cheap. But I still don't think that was enough to not give people a reason to listen to the album. There are plenty of music videos out there that are very simple, very minimalistic, not promoted aggressively, but they still do really well because of the songs that are accompanying them. So I don't fully buy this. Maybe if it was released in the early 2010s, like 2010 to 2015, I could see how music videos could have impacted the success of this album. But around 2017, 2018, music videos didn't really have that much power. They were just like a visual representation of the music for the fans, nothing more. Like, to this day, some of the best performing music videos are old music videos and songs from like K-pop artists or like super popular artists like Sabrina Carpenter or a Billie Eilish. The next theory here is that the label basically did her dirty. I don't have any objections to this point. If you've been watching my channel for a while, it's pretty much established that I am no fan of RCA. I don't really like that record label. If any of my faves sign to them, they're probably not gonna be my faves, which is why I'm so happy that Miley finally left RCA. But yeah, RCA has a track record of not really promoting their artists and their albums enough, and especially when the first few weeks come out and the album is not doing well, they're definitely not going to be promoting you. So I mean, it's not really that surprising. This is what RCA does. Next and final theory here is that the reason why it flopped was because it had minimal international push. I 100% agree with this, because why should a global artist like Christina Aguilera sell only 200,000 copies for this album worldwide? It makes no sense. Arguably, the majority of her fan base are outside of the United States, like Brazil and Latin-speaking markets. I'm not sure she has a huge fan base in Europe, but she probably does have a huge fan base in South Asian countries. Definitely not prioritizing her global audience was a huge part of why this album was not successful. And also, even if this album had been pushed internationally, the music that accompanied this album is not something that international audiences are really into. International audiences are not into experimental blends of R&B, soul, and hip-hop. A few might be, but most people, especially for Christina Aguilera fans, are very much pop heads. They like danceable pop songs, a ballad here or there from like Adele or something, but they mostly just like their dance music, which Christina has done a lot of in the past, and that is what grew her fan base in the past. So yeah, the sound of the album definitely contributed to why this was not as successful in the international markets as her previous albums or her previous singles were. So let me know what you guys think about these theories. Are there any more that I should have mentioned? Let me know in the comment section down below, and let me know other artists that you'd like me to do this style of video on, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.